So there's something about what Iran did today that most news reports are completely missing. And I want to explain it to you. Because the targets they chose, that wasn't random. That was a message. Quick thing before we dive in, drop the country you're watching from in the comments so I know where everyone's tuning in today. I actually do read them. So there's something about what Iran did today that most news reports are completely missing. And I want to explain it to you. Because the targets they chose, that wasn't random. That was a message. Let me back up. On July 23rd, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and the Iranian army launched strikes against United States military facilities in Kuwait and in Jordan. Now, if you just glanced at the headlines, you'd see the basic facts. IRGC claimed they destroyed a Patriot defense system, an MQ-9 drone depot in Kuwait, a THAAD radar system in Jordan, plus ammunition depots, fuel tanks, drones were involved. The whole thing was framed as retaliation for ongoing U.S. strikes against Iran. And look, that part is true. But that's also the part everybody's going to talk about. The surface level. The who did what to whom. What I haven't seen anyone explain is the geography. Because Iran didn't strike Israel. They didn't strike a U.S. Navy carrier group in the Persian Gulf. They didn't hit a soft target, some contractor convoy in Iraq that they could deny later. They hit Kuwait and Jordan. Think about that for a second. Kuwait and Jordan. Kuwait shares a border with Iraq and Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf. It's the staging ground for the U.S. military presence that has kept the region locked down for decades. Camp Arifjan, Ali al-Salem. That's not just a base, that's a headquarters. And Jordan? Jordan is the quiet linchpin. It borders Israel to the west, Syria and Iraq to the north, Saudi Arabia to the south. For the U.S., Jordan is the back door, the place where special operations move through without anyone asking questions. The place where the CIA does stuff they don't want anyone to know about. Iran hit both of them on the same day. Now ask yourself, why would they do that? It wasn't to bloody the nose of some random outpost. The IRGC isn't stupid. Their leadership is ruthless, sure, but they're also strategic. They think in years, not days. They're the same people who spent the last decade spreading their influence through proxies in Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq. They knew what they were doing. So let me walk you through what actually happened. And I mean the real mechanics of it. Because when you understand the timing is everything. This didn't come out of nowhere. The Biden administration, well, at this point, we've got whoever's running things now, and you know the situation. It's been a long year. They've been conducting airstrikes against Iranian targets for months. It started as a response to drone attacks on U.S. personnel. Then it escalated. Each strike was supposed to be a deterrent, a message that said, don't push further. Except Deterrence only works when the other side gets scared. And Iran doesn't scare that way. Here's something most people don't get. Iranian military doctrine is built around retaliation. It's not just a strategy, it's an identity. They don't believe in taking a hit and walking away. They believe in making sure you remember the hit, that you feel it, that your people see it on the news and wonder, was it worth it? And for the last several months, the U.S. has been hitting them hard enough to hurt, not hard enough to end it. And every single time, the IRGC sat there and took it on paper. But underneath, they were waiting. They were waiting for the right moment. Now. Let me explain what the IRGC actually hit. Because the weapon systems they claim to destroy, that's not just military jargon. Those are specific. They're expensive. They're high-tech. And they're American. All of them. The Patriot defense system. That's the crown jewel of U.S. air defense. The thing that's supposed to shoot down incoming missiles. The thing that makes U.S. bases feel safe. They said they destroyed one. The MQ-9 drone depot in Kuwait. MQ-9 Reapers are the workhorses of U.S. surveillance and strike operations. They fly high, they stay up forever, and they kill with precision. Iran said they hit the depot where those drones are stored. And then Jordan, a THAAD radar system. THAAD is the U.S. military's exo-atmospheric missile defense. It's designed to stop ballistic missiles at high altitude. It's some of the most advanced radar on the planet, and they claim to have taken it out. Now, how much of that is true? I don't have satellite photos, neither does anyone else who's talking publicly right now. But here's what I know about how Iran operates. When the IRGC makes a claim like this, they don't usually lie about the big stuff. They might exaggerate, they might stretch the truth, but they don't invent entire attacks out of nothing, because they know the U.S. military has eyes, satellites, signals intelligence. The Pentagon would know immediately if nothing happened, and they'd release photos to humiliate them. So something happened. Maybe not as extensive as they say, but something. And that's what scares me about this whole thing. Because the U.S. military is going to have to respond. They have to. If they don't, every other adversary on the planet gets the message that you can hit American bases and nothing happens. So we're looking at an escalation, a real one, not the kind where diplomats argue at the UN, the kind where missiles start flying in a chain. But let me slow down, because I don't want you to think I'm just telling you what happened. I want you to understand why this moment is different from all the other moments, and why it might be the one that tips everything over. Let's talk about Kuwait for a minute. Kuwait isn't just a U.S. ally, it's a U.S. protectorate. Not officially, but in practice. The U.S. military has been there since 1991. The Gulf War, Desert Storm. The first time America really committed ground forces in the Middle East after Vietnam. Kuwait is where the U.S. proved it could project power into the heart of the region. And Iran has never forgotten that. In 1991, Iran watched the U.S. crush Saddam Hussein's army. They watched American armor roll through the desert. They watched the Air Force own the sky. And they learned. They learned that a direct war with the U.S. would be catastrophic. So they changed tactics. Instead of building a conventional army to match America, they built asymmetric capabilities. Drones, missiles, cyber, proxies, and they learned to be patient. That patience is what got us here. Because for the past few years, Iran has been doing something really interesting. They've been building out their drone and missile infrastructure, not just to defend themselves, but to project power beyond their borders, to be able to strike Saudi Arabia, or the UAE, or U.S. bases. And they've practiced, they've tested, they've calibrated. Now they're using it. Here's the part that makes my stomach turn. The Iranian army was involved in these strikes too, not just the IRGC. That's a big deal. The IRGC is the ideological wing. They're the ones who run the Quds Force, the proxies, the unconventional stuff. But the Iranian army, that's the conventional military. That's the people who drive tanks and fly jets. When the army participates in an operation against U.S. forces, that's different. That signals that the Iranian state, not just a faction of it, is signing off on this. So what you have now is a formal military response from the Iranian government, not a proxy attack, not a militia with plausible deniability. The official armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran struck U.S. military facilities in 2 countries. That's a threshold. And I need you to understand something else. This is happening while the entire region is on a knife's edge. You've got Israel in the north fighting on multiple fronts: Gaza, Lebanon, the West Bank, their own internal political chaos. You've got the Houthis in Yemen continuing to launch attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. You've got Iraq and Syria in this weird limbo where U.S. troops are still there, but nobody really knows why anymore. And the Gulf states are watching it all with their hands over their mouths. And now Iran just threw a punch at the U.S. military in 2 of those countries. So let me ask you something, and I want you to sit with this. Do you think this is the end of it, or do you think this is the beginning of something bigger? Because I think you already know the answer. The IRGC didn't just say we destroyed this and that. They framed the whole thing as retaliation, a response to U.S. strikes against Iran. In their own statement, they used words like ongoing and continued. They're not saying this is payback for one specific incident. They're saying this is payment on a running tab. And that's the real threat, because a running tab never gets paid off. You don't settle a running tab with one strike. You keep hitting. They keep hitting. It becomes a feedback loop. And the longer it goes on, the more both sides get locked into a cycle where stopping feels like weakness. So now the U.S. has a choice. And I'm not going to pretend like I know what they'll do, but I can tell you what the options look like. Option 1. The U.S. responds with a proportionate military strike. Hit an Iranian target in Syria, or maybe inside Iraq. Something that sends a message but doesn't blow the whole thing up. That's the safe choice. It's predictable. It's what we've seen for the last year. But predictable isn't working. That's the whole problem. If predictable worked, Iran would have stopped months ago. They haven't. They escalated. So option 1 might just be more of the same. Option 2, the U.S. escalates. Hits something inside Iran itself. A base, a nuclear facility. Something they know Iran can't absorb without losing face. That would be a major shift. That would take this from a regional conflict to a direct confrontation. And option 3, the U.S. does nothing, or very little. That's the worst outcome, in my opinion, because if the U.S. absorbs these strikes and just rolls over, every Iranian in leadership goes, oh, okay, so we can do this again. And I'm not saying that to be dramatic. That's just how power politics works. You either enforce the boundary or the boundary moves. Now, there's another angle here. And this is the one I really haven't seen anyone talking about. Kuwait and Jordan are not just U.S. allies. They're Arab states, Sunni Arab states. They have their own relationships with Iran, their own fears, their own quiet back-channel communications. Iran just struck U.S. bases in their territory, which puts them in an impossible position. If they side with the U.S. publicly, they become targets themselves. If they stay quiet, it looks like they're condoning the attack. If they get caught trying to balance both, nobody trusts them. That's the real game here. Iran isn't just attacking American hardware. They're attacking the American alliance structure. They're saying to every Gulf monarchy, you think the U.S. can protect you? Look what we just did on their own bases. Look how easy it was. Look at your protector's vulnerability. That message is going to be heard loud and clear in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, in Doha, in Muscat. And that could reshape the entire Middle East. Because if the Gulf states start to believe that American protection is unreliable, they'll start looking for other patrons. Or worse, they'll cut their own deals with Iran. And once that starts, it's a landslide. Think about what that means for oil, for shipping, for the global economy, for the price of everything you buy. This is bigger than a military skirmish. This is about credibility. And credibility is the hardest thing to get back once you lose it. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, okay, but this is just Iran. They're always making noise. They're always threatening. Why is this different? I get it. I really do. We've been hearing about Iran for so long that it starts to feel like background noise, like the weather. It's always there, it's always bad, but somehow things keep going. But here's why this is different. Because they crossed the line between proxies and direct military action. And they did it in front of the whole world. On July 23rd, at a moment when the U.S. military is stretched thin, when American attention is divided between everything, Europe, the Pacific, the border, the domestic chaos, they saw that window and they walked through it. That's not just aggression. That's calculation. That's what happens when an adversary watches you closely for years, takes notes on your weaknesses, and picks the exact moment to test you. And I want you to think about what happens next. Not tomorrow, not next week, but a year from now, 5 years from now. If the U.S. responds hard, we're in a war. Maybe not a declared war, but a real one. Americans are going to be deployed. Americans are going to die. And the American public, you don't have the stomach for another Middle East war. I don't say that as an insult. I say it as a fact. We've been through Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, 20 years of it, and nobody, and I mean nobody, wants to do that again. So the administration is caught between a rock and a hard place. Respond too weak, and you look like a paper tiger. Respond too strong, and you're sending kids into the desert again. There's no good answer. There's only choosing which bad outcome you can live with. And that right there is the tragedy of this whole situation. We got here not because anyone wanted a fight, but because everyone kept making small escalations that seemed necessary at the time. And those small escalations added up until they became a big one. Now let me talk about something else. Something I think every American should hear. Iran's military leadership, they're not crazy. They're not the cartoon, not irrational. They're not the cartoon villains that some people make them out to be. They're ruthless, they're ambitious, they're deeply ideological, but they're also capable of strategic patience. They know the U.S. is tired. They know the American public doesn't want another war. They know the U.S. military is the most powerful in the world, but also the most overstretched. And they know that if they can wait long enough, if they can make it cost enough, the U.S. will eventually leave. That's their entire strategy. It's not about winning a decisive military victory. It's about making the U.S. decide it's not worth it. And honestly, they might be right. Let me take you back to the moment of the strikes. The actual moment. Not the news conference, not the statements, but the seconds when those drones were in the air moving toward their targets. Think about what that feels like. On the American side, somewhere in Kuwait, a soldier is standing watch. Maybe they're sleeping. Maybe they're eating. And suddenly there's an alarm. And they're running. And they don't know if the next thing they see is going to be the last thing they see. That's real. That's not a geopolitical abstraction. That's a human being. And on the Iranian side, someone in a control room somewhere watched a screen, tracked the drone, watched it hit, and they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew the aftermath. They knew the risk. They did it anyway. This is not a video game. This is not a debate in a classroom. This is live ammunition. This is people's lives. And the people making these decisions on both sides are choosing to risk them. I don't say that to make you feel hopeless. I say it because I think you deserve to understand the weight of what happened. So here's my read, my actual read, not what I think the news will say, what I think is really going on. Iran is testing. They're testing the U.S. response. They're testing the Gulf states' loyalty. They're testing the limits of what they can get away with. And they chose a set of targets that sends a very specific message. We can hit your defenses. We can hit your drone operations. We can hit your radar. We can do this in 2 different countries simultaneously. The message is, you are not as safe as you think. And the cost of staying here is going to go up. Now, what does the U.S. do? I don't know. Nobody knows. Not even the people in the White House or wherever the decision gets made know for sure yet. But I do know that the window for a measured response is closing. Every hour that passes, the pressure builds on the military, on the president, on the diplomats. Because if you wait too long, it starts to look like you don't have an answer. And that's the worst look of all. Let me also say something about the media coverage, because I'm a little frustrated with it. Not angry, just frustrated. Most of the coverage I've seen is just repeating the Iranian statement and the Pentagon's "we're looking into it" line. They're not explaining the significance. They're not talking about the geopolitics. They're not telling you why Kuwait and Jordan matter differently than Iraq or Syria. And I think that's a problem. Because if you don't understand the context, you can't understand the danger. You just see another headline about another thing happening in another country you can't find on a map. I want you to understand it. That's why I'm sitting here doing this, talking to you like this, because I think you deserve better than the abbreviated version. So let me give you the abbreviated version of the unabbreviated version. Here's the bottom line. Iran and the United States are on a collision course. Not because either side wants a war, but because both sides have painted themselves into corners where backing down is almost impossible. Iran can't back down because they've framed this as a response to American aggression. If they stop now, they lose credibility with their own military, with their proxies, with their domestic audience. The U.S. can't back down because if they don't respond, every enemy of America takes note. And that includes not just Iran, China, Russia, North Korea, all of them. So we're stuck between 2 bad options. And the only question is, how bad does it get before someone blinks? I don't have the answer to that. And anyone who tells you they do is lying. What I have is a sense of foreboding. a knot in my stomach that doesn't go away no matter how many times I think through the scenarios. Because I've seen this pattern before in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in the lead up to the 2006 Lebanon war. When two adversaries keep escalating because neither wants to be seen as weak and neither is willing to de-escalate without a guarantee that the other side won't exploit it. And those stories, they don't end well. Let me bring it home for you. You live in a country that is the most powerful on earth, military, economic, cultural. People all over the world look to you for leadership, or at least they used to. But power isn't something you just have. It's something you have to use. And when you use it, you have to use it wisely. Because every time you don't, or every time you use it poorly, you lose a little bit of it. That's what we're watching right now. The erosion of American credibility. Not because of one bad decision, but because of 1,000 small ones. And now Iran is standing at the door, knocking loudly, asking if we still have the will to keep it closed. I don't know what the answer is, but I know we have to find it, and fast. Now, I want to tell you something that might not be in any other commentary you watch tonight. This isn't just about Iran. This is about the entire global order. The one the U.S. built after World War II. The one that everyone kind of assumed would be permanent. That order is cracking. In Europe, in the Pacific, in the Middle East. And this attack on U.S. bases in Kuwait and Jordan is another crack. Another sign that the old rules don't apply anymore. And what happens when the rules don't apply? What happens when no one believes in the system? You get chaos. You get everyone for themselves. You get a world where the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. That's where we're heading. Not tomorrow, but if things keep going this way, in a few years, that's the world we'll be living in. And I don't want that. I don't think you do either. But wanting doesn't change reality. Actions change reality. And right now, the actions are pointing in a dangerous direction. So here's my final thought for you tonight. And I want you to really sit with it. We've been watching Iran and the U.S. play this game for decades. It's always been intense. It's always been dangerous, but it's always been contained. A line would get crossed, things would heat up, and then some quiet back channel would cool it down. I don't think that's going to happen this time. Not because no one wants it to, but because the channels are too broken. The trust is too degraded. The momentum is too strong. This is the moment when the game changes, and we're all just watching it unfold. So what do? What do any of us do? You pay attention. You don't look away. You don't let the noise drown out the signal. Because this is important. This is your life, your country, your future. And yeah, I know. I know it's a lot. And I know you might feel helpless. I feel that way sometimes too. But being informed is the first step. Understanding what's at stake is the second. From there, We just have to hope that the people in power remember what they're risking and that they find the wisdom to step back from the edge. Because the edge is closer than you think. And once you fall, there's no climbing back. Thank you for sitting with me through this. I know it wasn't easy, but I think it was necessary. This isn't over. It's probably just beginning.